you so much, everyone. Good evening. I'm reading the chat box. Good evening to everyone joining us from Philippines, Indonesia, and so many different countries. Thank you for the overwhelming response. It fills our heart with great joy that people from so many different countries, from over 30 countries, register for our webinars and join us. Thank you so much. Today, we'll be talking about identification and diagnosis of specific learning disorders with Toby Philip Jacob. This is the second webinar from the Specific Learning Disorders series, but more on that a little later. Let me tell you a little bit about Ability. So, for Ability, for us as an organization, all carers of children with special needs, that is, special educators, therapists, caregivers, and of course, parents, you all are at the center of our universe. Every child wants to thrive, right? And every child should be given the opportunity to thrive. And our mission is to make these things easier. Our mission is to make things easier for you all. And when we say easier, we mean making it more affordable, making it more accessible, and most important of all, making it more effective for you all. And one way we have been able to do that is through technology. But while we understand that technology could help a lot, we also do understand that without the caregivers, technology alone is insufficient. Technology can only be a support in this journey, can only offer the support in this journey, but cannot bring about any significant change alone. And there are other support systems required, such as community resources, because no one should have to do this alone, right? And that's what Ability brings to you. It brings to you a community to share with, discuss with, and communicate with. It brings to you range of resources to enable the best chance of discovering your child's true potential. One of the ways we bring it to you is through our YouTube channel. It has hundreds of useful videos from different experts from different countries, which can help you discover your child's true potential and which can also help you to help your child better. So go to YouTube and look for Ability, search for EBLITY, subscribe to our channel so that you can stay updated with all the updates from this channel and watch any useful content or video that comes and is being uploaded. Apart from that, of course, Facebook, the world is on Facebook and so are we. Thousands of people are already following us. If you are not one of them, go do that right now. You can go to www.facebook.com/ability. Following this page will keep you updated about all our upcoming events, be it webinars, workshops, or anything else that Ability would be organizing in future to help you better or to serve you better. The links of both our YouTube channel and our Facebook page is being shared in the chat box by our respective team members. So go check it out after the webinar, of course. And like I was talking towards the starting of the webinar, our mission is to make things easier for you all. One way we have been able to do it is with technology, and through technology, we have been able to, reach out to you all through webinars. This webinar is no different. Webinars is for the purpose of the foundational knowledge building of everyone involved who is attending the session today. Apart from that, we have also recently launched workshops. The purpose of workshops is a little different. It is majorly to support direct interaction with the expert through enabling a smaller group setting so that the attendee has a much deeper understanding and a greater learning experience when they attend workshops. So if you haven't signed up for any of the Ability workshops as of yet, you should definitely experience it once, and I'm sure you're going to love it. Okay, so coming to the session of today, like I already said, this is the second webinar from the SLD webinar series. SLD stands for Specific Learning Disorders. We had the first one on Introduction to Specific Learning Disorders. Today, we'll be talking about identification and diagnosis of SLD. Later in this series, we'll be talking about planning instructions, support systems, and understanding the different types of specific learning disorders such as dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. And without further ado, coming to the speaker of the day, today we'll be having this session with Mr. Toby Philip Jacob. He's a senior psychologist with an MPhil in learning disabilities psychology. He has over more than 6 years of experience in clinical psychology, and also he's a program coordinator for professional certification courses at the Sashaktikaran Trust, Cochin. He is specialized in assessment of children with special needs, remedial intervention, and behavior therapy. We are so glad to have you here with us, Toby. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And without making our attendees wait any further, would you please take over for today's session?
Yes. Okay. Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Toby Philip Jacob. I'm the senior psychologist out in the Sashaktikaran Trust. Okay, Cochin. So I would like to start from a recap of the previous webinar. Okay. So just a recap of the last webinar. I think almost all of you had attended it. So what is specific learning disorder or SLD? It's a neurodevelopmental disorder. Okay, that is a known thing with an IQ functioning or an intellectual functioning of more than 70. That is near average, average, and above average intellectual functioning. The child will face difficulties in academic learning. There will be deficits in skills and behaviors that contribute to academic learning. And as you know, you have came up through the names a lot of times, like dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. That means the dyslexia is the reading disorders, dysgraphia is the writing disorders, dyscalculia is the mathematical disorders. And currently a non-verbal LD is also has come, because that is actually based on the behaviors and added impressions of the child. So coming to our focus of today is on early identification and screening, informal assessment for the planning of intervention, diagnosis, and tools. Okay. Before I start over the topics and all, I would like to put in a question for you. What is SLD? That means, how do you wish to label it? Okay. The question is, it's all part of a perspective. I have put two parts over here. That means a specific learning disorder and a specific learning difficulties. So these two are the questions that comes in front of you. That means, what is SLD? How do you wish to label it? Because as my mentor always tells me, labels are for jars and not for children. It is better not to label them, but to provide them with ample support. Okay. So the process of identification and diagnosis. Okay. We always have come forward with questions. That means answering questions are the basic things that have made us come forward. So I would like to put in a few questions and answer that as the process of identification and diagnosis. Why, what, when, and how. Okay. Why? Why should we assess? Okay. Most of the parents with children with having learning difficulties would have asked their better half this question. Why my child needs assessment? Or why, what is the issue with my child or our child? Or how do you know that our child has an issue? Okay. So these are the questions that always arises in it. So if you have a kind of, what do you call it, dizziness or any kinds of palpitations or anything like that, you always go for a routine checkup. So likewise, we have to start doing this for our child also. That means the child has issues in learning or something like that. So go on, have a checkup. If he doesn't have an issue, it is well and good. If he has an issue, that is so you can actually help him at an earlier rate. Okay. So Why assess means you will have to identify difficulties as early as possible. Why we are telling as early as possible is because of the neuroplasticity of children. It helps to the child to get up and cope up with their issues as faster as possible. That means their ability to go through and understand things and make a lot of neural connections is on a faster rate when they are younger. So they will have to provide uh, as one, identify it as early as possible. You have to provide effective remedial programs. That means you will have to provide them and streamline what are the services that has to be provided and in how much quantities it has to be provided to prevent secondary behaviors and other related issues. What are secondary behaviors such as ADHD, other antisocial personalities, all those kinds of issues? To prevent that, to bring up a better social and emotional well-being for them. That means at a younger age, if a proper support is given, okay, they might have a balanced life on the further run. So you will have to have a proper social and emotional well-being for that, and also to pave way for a holistic inclusion. That means a child which should have an all-round help. That means an all-round development of the child is always necessary. Help has to come at time. Okay. Why? The purpose of assessment. As you can see, the arrow goes up, left, right, down, all the way around. So there are 4 areas: early identification or screening, informal assessment for intervention, formal diagnosis, and disability certification. So why I have put the arrows in a different way is that because based on the requirement of the child, your effort actually moves to different ways. Because a child who comes for a screening or an early identification can directly go to a formal diagnosis, or a child with an informal assessment can stop over there and not move forward and be provided with interventions. At the age after, if the higher school child or a higher level child would only require a disability certification. So it's basically, it has to be implemented and it will be explained a bit forward on the next slides. Okay. What to note? What are the things that has to be kept in mind for the identification of learning difficulties? So you will have to understand that there are certain things that has to be kept in mind. That means a child will have issues and will be showing issues which are prominent in the eyes of a teacher, a parent, or somebody else. But it might not even be prominent in front of others also. So those are known as markers of SLD or indicators. Okay. I will be explaining some of the indicators on the next set of slides. So what are markers of SLD? They are early identification markers that provide us with information that the child should, or might require support. Okay. Indicators or risk factors for child differs from based on the grade levels. Okay. Over here, I have put up indicators at the preschool level, indicators for grade KG 1 to 4, indicators for grades 5 to 8, indicators for high school and adults. Okay. This is actually in an Indian context. On coming back to a Cambridge or an international concept, I will put it up into an age category for you. So for better understanding, the preschool level is between 2 to 4 years of age. The KG 1 to 4 is between 4 to 10 years of age. And the indicators of grade 5 to 8 is between 10 to 14 years of age. And the high school and above is 14 plus. Okay. Coming back to indicators at preschool level. I once saw a child, because the parent came to me telling that the child is not sitting in his place. He's running around. He's always distracted. And he has issues with fine motor. That means he's not able to mold things, pick up things properly. And his speech is not clear. He pronunciation is not proper, and it goes on. And based on that, his interaction with other children is not proper. So we have an outline. We have just had a thought that this child might be at risk for a specific learning disorder or might have learning difficulties. So on behalf of that, we have come to a pile of indicators that would help everybody. It means delay in speech and language and pronunciation, difficulty learning numbers, alphabets, days of the week, colors and shapes. It means the basic concepts. then means the child might be restless or shift from task or cannot shift from task properly with regard to an academic activity, may have difficulty in interacting with peers. They might have a difficulty following directions and routines, and the fine motor issues might be having some kind of errors. Okay, so these are the indicators of at the preschool level. So the indicators of grade KG 1 to 4 is slightly higher than the previous one. So in that, what happens is that letters and alphabets comes into practice, and numbers and arithmetic signs comes into notice. So these are mostly coming into the academic level. The other one was mostly on the pre-academic level or pre-writing or pre-reading skills. So this comes into the academic level. So the child would face difficulties with the letter sound association. They might have a confusion with the arithmetic signs. That means a child might add up when he is told to subtract. He doesn't understand the sign actually, and he might add for division. And the division sign over here, we have a oblique for it, but the normal procedures is a minus and a dot, two dots on the top. If the dots are not segregated properly, the child will think it is to add up. So that's what happens most of the times. They have a confusion with arithmetics. They have a difficulty in reading common words. Okay, that means is, was, that, when, where. So these are the common words that come up, and smaller words, but sight words. That's what we usually tell as common words. So these, they have difficulties in identifying those words and reading them. So, and obviously they would make consistent reading and spelling errors. A bunch of kids would have a number or letter reversals. Okay, a capital A is a letter that doesn't have an issue with mirror, but a small b and d would have an issue, because a child who is writing bad, if he writes instead of b d, it would be dad. So that's what happens. No, the number and the letter reversals would be there. Poor pencil grip or faces handwriting difficulties. Their concept about time would not be proper. That means they have difficulties in learning about time. They have poor motor coordination. They are prone to tripping, because as they go over obstacles, they tend to trip on it, and they are told as clumsy. These kids are labeled as clumsy, and not just that they have a motor coordination issues. Excuse me. So these are the ones that you have to identify at a KG1 level to grade 4. So these areas, if any child has an issue in one or more areas, you will have to keep an eye and provide them with a screening or support services. So coming to grade 5 to 8. So these, from here onwards, it's all prominent. So grades 5 to 8, almost 70 to 80% of the teachers can view and understand that this child is surely having an issue. So because it is that prominent, that means they won't be able to read properly. Their reading comprehension might be poor. They won't write properly. Copying from the board even is an issue. Okay, they might be copying by letter or word by word. This THIS is IS, A. See, that is how they copy things. So effortful reading with lots of errors and avoiding reading aloud, because they have a fear that what they read might be wrong, or likewise. Weak spelling skills may spell the word differently in a single piece of writing. That means a child who has written the word wasp, WASP, correctly the first time in a paragraph might write on the next one as WSP. That means the same word has been written in two different ways in the same paragraph. So that is the kinds of errors that they tend to make. I mean, the notes are incomplete, as I told you. They avoid writing assignments. They have poor mathematical skills. That means calculations and reasoning. That means as it goes up, it is based on sentences. That means you have 10 apples. Okay, if you give me 5 apples, how much apple would you have? See, that is a calculation that it becomes into sentences, and they are not able to concentrate on so many concepts together. Poor memory with regard to academic concepts. They have difficulty in making friends and in understanding body gestures, body languages, and facial expressions. Means what is the what the other person is trying to express is not properly understood by them at times. The indicators of high school and adult, that means over here it is all higher order. That means comprehension, applying of concepts into another things. That means Einstein's concepts put into some another formula, or likewise. I mean, I'm not going that much higher, but still, it means you will have to understand that this you should do a simple subtraction for over here, or you will have to apply a topic over here. That means their abstract skills or reasoning skills might have issues. Okay, so the major indicators of a high school and an adult is actually they have weak spelling skills, avoids reading and writing tasks because they have issues, and then this issue might have not sprouted up at the high school level. This might have been at a lower level but not taken care of properly. Difficulty in summarizing a story or relating an experience, weak in studying and examination taking skills, poor grasp of abstract concepts, pays too little attention or focuses too much to detail and misses the big picture. That means they might be concentrating on a single word and trying to find a meaning of the whole passage. So that's what happens, because a new word might be interest for them. So that actually doesn't allow them to complete the whole assignment properly. Misreads information and cannot comprehend well. Poor functional mathematics skills, handling money, time, etc. Because they have issues with the mathematical skills. So giving up a change or something like that is not. Because likewise, examples that has come up with adults is that well, it's actually a story that is told out over here. A man who started a shop once, he didn't know enough have knowledge about mathematics and all. So somebody told him you can use a calculator. All he knew was the numbers. So the first person who came to purchase things told, he needed a chocolate, a pack of bread, and jam. So at the end of the conversation, he gave these three things. So what did you buy? He took out the calculator and chocolate, 5. Okay. Then bread, 30, 30. And the jam, 20. So this is how much you have to pay. That is the person shows how much he has to pay. That came up to 53,020 rupees. So that is the kind of understanding and information that we actually don't give, because we have to train them on a proper level so that these kinds of issues don't come forward. When to act, okay? When is a question means the answer is now. That's what I always tell you. That means as early as possible. If you find that your child has an issue at a 5th grade, do an assessment or a screening now. That is as early as possible, because you have only identified it at that time. Okay, never delay the help or the support that the child should be getting. Okay, when academic learning difficulties are related to behaviors, they are noticed more, because the child doesn't go to school, the child has issues with going to school or attending a maths class, or doesn't like to go for examinations, has a severe stomach pain during the examinations, dizziness, or can't wake up in the morning. So these are the things that show that academic learning, so behaviors that are related to academic learning. How? Okay, how? There are 4 areas that we have. That means that are the options available currently. That means we have summarized the options actually into it. So the first is screening, as usual, just to identify. That means does this child have an issue or not? That means yes or no. That means does your child have reading comprehension issues? Yes. Does your child have letter reversals? Yes. That means all these things are taken into account. That means just simple yes or no. So if you have a greater number of yes or have a greater number of issues, you actually send the child for an informal assessment or a formal assessment. Okay. Why do you do an informal assessment? It is to provide, informal assessments are for the purpose of intervention planning. Okay. So you will have to provide the child with the support and the required needs for the child. Means you find the level of the child. That means this is what the level. That means the child has to start from understanding blends, or suppose the child has to start from sentences. That means how to form sentences. So that is the level that you have to understand and provide intervention. So formal assessment is usually given, and the formal assessment in an Indian context, that means we tell from 8 years of age, we do a formal assessment. That means a proper diagnosis is done. So before that, it is always, we try to do an informal assessment because there is no labeling of the child. Because from a formal assessment point of view, the label starts to be formed. That means this child is having specific learning disorders, or this child is dyslexic, this child is having dysgraphia, likewise. So before the age of 8, we have actually do an informal assessment. The next comes as a certification. It is for availing accommodations and modifications from respective academic boards. So these provisions that the child gets and they are entitled to get. That means a child with specific learning disorder is entitled to get during the time of examinations, before at the board level, and other things. That means there are certain certification available also, and accommodations and modifications that comes up in the next coming webinars. Okay. So the commonly used screening tools, means in India, we have a commonly used screening tool, that is a BCSLD, that is a behavior checklist for the screening of learning disabled. And the one that was made in UK based is a DSTJ, that means Dyslexia Screening Test Junior. And next to the DSTS, it is not senior, it is secondary. Dyslexia Screening Test Secondary. And they have an early version also, that is a DEST, that means Dyslexia Early Screening Test. So these are the tests that is available in current one. It was actually created in the UK regions, and it is currently available with Indian norms. So these tools help you to understand and identify if the child has an issue or not. And we come to the informal assessments. What are informal assessments? That means mostly informal assessments are either teacher-made test or a curriculum-based assessment or a grade level-based. That means that means the child, you just need to find out the level of the child. So that these levels of the child has to be assessed and given support. So informal assessments it just takes a limited amount of time. That means the understanding of the area that the child needs to be given support from. That is how we tend to explain it. So the formal assessments is actually a huge process. That means the formal assessment starts with the case history taking. That means the information is collected from the parent. That means the child's academic learning, the educational background, and then comes the behavioral patterns, emotional patterns, family history, school history, birth history of the child, and it goes on. So all these informations are taken and taken into account and just quantified to understand from which all areas we have to concentrate during the assessments. Okay. Then an IQ assessment is done. That means over here we use the Binet-Kamath test, BKT, and internationally approved WISC is also there, Wechsler's Intelligence Scale for Children, which has the 5th version now. Then there's a WAPIS, Wechsler's Adult Performance Intelligence Scale. There is a MISIC, that means Malin's Intelligence Scale for Indian children, etc. These are supposed to be done by psychologists. Usually, they are the one who handle it. So when it comes to an educational assessment, we have to cover a lot of areas. It means reading, writing, arithmetics, spelling, all those things has to be taken into account. So the test that comes up is the GLAD, first of all, grade level and assessment devices, that is usually used in Indian context out over here. So GLAD is in Hindi and in English. Okay, it covers the areas of reading, writing, comprehension, and basic arithmetics from grade 1 to 4. Then there's the NIMHANS index for assessment of children with specific learning disorders. There's a DTLD, that is diagnostic tool of the learning disorders. Then comes DTRD, diagnostic test of reading disorders. Then CTOP is there, comprehensive test of phonological processing. There's a Shonell's reading and spelling test, etc. These are supposed to be done by special educators or rehabilitation practitioners with the expertise in the area of specific learning disorders. Okay, certification. So coming on to certification, when a certification has to be done. I mean, certification has to be done when the child approaches at a board level. That means the board examinations are yet to be taken. So when do you wish to, that means what you will, the certification actually allows the child to avail provisions from board exam for board examinations. So you will have to understand that each board has their own guidelines and their provisions. So in India, the state central board of secondary education is the most of the schools come up. There is a state board over here. Each state has a board. So each states have their guidelines and provisions given in their own website. So if you wish to know that which all are the ones, you can go to their website and find it out. So in India, just I'm giving you a brief of India. In India, that means the ruling out of neurological issues is what has to be done initially. That means such as the child doesn't have an issue with vision and their hearing. So these areas has to be taken. That means you will have to rule out that there's no neurological issues. And the second comes is the IQ assessment through MISIC and WISC. So the child should have an IQ of above 85. I had previously told you that means according to the DSM-5 criteria, it is 70 or more. But in the state of, in India, we follow, that means IQ has to be 85 or more as per the Government of India rule. So, and the assessment that has to be done is through the NIMHANS index for SLD. Okay. That means all the details areas can be seen. Okay. For just to be, give you an examples of it, and in suppose like if you're coming from a country like UAE, United Arab Emirates, a CDI licensed person is the person who is entitled to certify your the child's for the provisions of the child. Okay. So what are the usual provisions that we would be getting? That means I will give you a brief which will be covered in the next coming webinars. For it means these are the common ones that can be seen in almost all boards. I mean the grammatic errors would be not taken into account, the spelling errors won't be taken into account, and the child's content will be only be assessed. Extra time for the child will be given, and even use of computers can be taken. This one. In India, there is an option to drop a subject and take up another subject like social science, and all, and take up subjects such as home science, computer applications, painting, likewise. So these are the areas that we. So concluding over, what I would like to emphasize on this, assessment or screening has to be done for the purpose of helping the child and not just for labeling. Timely help and timely support should be given. Now is the time for you to help your child or somebody else's child. Always keep a keen eye for it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Toby. That was a wonderful session. Hope all the attendees did get to learn something very valuable from you. We have received a lot of questions, and I'll shortly begin with the Q&A session. But before that, I would like to inform all our attendees that from 23rd January, we have a workshop series organized on parenting by none other than Tejashree Majumdar Gambhir. So if you would like to know more about the workshop series, please check the link in the chat box, which would be shared by our team members shortly. And you can register for the workshop. I'm pretty sure, especially for parents, it would be really, really beneficial. Apart from that, if you have not already, like most of all must already know that this is an ongoing series on specific learning disorders. This is the second webinar of the ongoing series. But if you have just registered for this webinar in particular and not for the entire series, then you might want to go to another link shared by our team members and register for the entire series. Okay, so moving on. Toby, a lot of people have asked us a lot of questions, but we have picked the significant few which are most commonly being asked by a lot of people. And Shama is one of those who is asking us that how to identify children with different needs in a pre-primary or primary class setup for early intervention. Although you did cover this part briefly in your presentation, but if you could throw light on this once again, that would be great.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. The question has come up in the same because I had actually explained it because I will show you the slides also, because a preschool level, that means a pre-primary and a primary classes. In India, the primary classes are usually known as the grade 1 and 2, or it spills upward to the third grade. So the indicators of a preschool level are more on what you call at a finger-based level. That means fine motor, gross motor, speech-based. That means it's all part of a sensory-based levels. So these areas are the ones that you have to keep into account. It means a delay in speech might be, or have the child might have been showing all these, which has to be noticed, and means there are children who show delay in learning, but and as time goes on they will cope up with it, but some children might not be able to cope up with it and might and will be showing more and more difficulties in the areas. That means identification of color is also there. That means fine motor skills issues are there, and likewise. And coming back to the grade 1 and 2, the letter sound association, number reversals, the major thing that we can notice is the number reversals and the pencil or fine motor things. So these are the ones that you have to keep into account. Yes.
All right. Okay, moving on. The next question is from Denny Sigarlaki. Denny is asking us if there are any standardized diagnosis tools for preschoolers, elementary school goers, juniors, and senior high school students. If there are specific tools for students in these different categories.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Uh, for the purpose of a preschooler elementary purpose, we would actually always prefer to go for an informal assessment. Even though formal assessments are there, informal assessment saves time and helps us to provide faster and immediate support for the child. There are in one tests that comes up that are widely used, such as a SNAP, that is Special Needs and Assessment Profile. It's a widely used assessment tool all over the world. And as I told before, there is a TORC, that is a test of reading comprehension. There is a TOWER, that means test of word reading efficiency, TOWRE, TOWER. And there is also CTOP, that means comprehensive test of phonological processing. So even though these areas you can understand that the child will have difficulty, but informal tests or curriculum based or area wise tests is always most efficient to understand the child rather than these specific tools.
So hope that answered your question, Denny. Okay, and a lot of people who are attending and watching the webinar live on Zoom are asking us, one of them being Hema Sahu, she's telling that different terminologies are being used in the special education community, such as learning disability, learning disorder, and learning difficulties. So what is the relevance of all these three terminologies, and what is the difference between three of them?
Yes. Learning difficulties, learning disabilities, and learning disorders. Yeah. So, yes, these terms, okay, as I told you earlier, we don't actually promote the terminologies. Your child has a difficulty. That is all that means, difficulty in learning. Not even, we don't actually emphasize that it is a learning difficulty. Okay, why to label a child without even looking or even trying to provide support for the child? So these terminologies are usually used by us in a webinar or while talking to a parent or talking to a professional, because these terminologies actually try to help us to boost our confidence and also to keep an upper hand over the conversation. But what we actually tell is that it is a difficulty in learning of the child. So provide the child with proper help and interventions, so remedial training or anything, whichever support is provided or required at time and on time, so that you don't have any issues. We don't actually like the labeling process.
Yeah, so labeling should not be done for any child. Hope this message is loud and clear enough to all the attendees here. Next question is from Hepzibah Suresh Toby. Hepzibah is asking us if all the specific or different types of specific disorders show any common symptoms, and how to identify if some of those common symptoms are seen. So if you could elaborate on those common symptoms and also the identification process.
Okay. Specific disorders, because that question is not actually clear. Because the specific disorders means, is it specific neurological disorders? Is it specific learning disorders? Or is it a specific disorder that means it's taken into account? Because the question itself is not clear. But I will give you an outline or a brief about it. Because what has to be taken into account is that all disabilities will tamper with the normal functioning of the child. It might be either in the academic areas, it might be in the behavioral areas, it might be in the daily living skills. That means it might even hinder in the socialization of the child or in many more areas. So how do you understand or how do you identify is through three things. That's what I usually have understood from my day-to-day life. Means it's a special education term actually. Means acquisition, maintenance, and generalization. What we tell is AMG. Acquisition is the child has to acquire it and keep it. That means that skill has to be acquired. At a certain age, that skill has to be acquired. Maintenance. That means that skill has to be maintained and put forward, and the child should be able to show it over and over again. And generalization. Then child should be able to put in that idea into effect onto the next level. Suppose you are writing, you are studying the letter A and the sound is A. Okay, the child should be able to, when you see her hears the word apple, the child should understand that it is A that comes up for apple. So that is the kind of generalization that should be coming. So these three areas, that means almost all the disorders, these three areas has to be taken into consideration on all the steps. It means all the developmental stages. Yes.
Got it. Hope that answers your question, Hepzibah. Take into consideration these three things mentioned by Toby. Okay, moving on to the next question. This is from Anjali. Anjali is asking us for CBSE exemptions in particular, if a certificate from private hospitals like Fortis, Max, or any of the other private hospital chains, etc., is also valid.
Okay. Certification for CBSE means the government of India has provided us with a certain guidelines of how to do it. That means who all should be doing an assessment for and who all should be certifying it. And even CBSE, that means every year updates their guidelines of who should be doing it, what should be done, and what are the provisions for it. So what is commonly seen is that a professional who is registered under the Rehabilitation Council of India, that is RCI, needs to be the person who certifies it. That means a rehabilitation practitioner, a clinical psychologist, likewise. So that is actually properly given in the CBSE guidelines for provisions or accommodations and modifications. So if you can have a look over it, it will be, but make sure, because it is actually labeled under the term of intellectual disability. So I don't know why that has been done, but it is labeled under intellectual disability. So make sure you don't miss that.
Sure. So refer to those guidelines and don't miss that it has been labeled under intellectual disabilities. Hope that piece of advice from Toby helps you find those guidelines in a much more clear way. Okay, moving on to the next question. This is from Maureen. Maureen is asking us, how can we help a student which has been identified with certain red flag symptoms, but not yet diagnosed by the developmental pediatrician? So for our other users attending this webinar, I would like to inform there are a lot of checklists available which point out certain red flags based on the observations of your child. So this question from Maureen is related to that. If the child is shows some symptoms of red flags, but not yet diagnosed by the developmental pediatrician.
Yes. Okay. What is red flags indicators? That means those are the points that the child might be at risk. That means from there onwards, you understand that the child is at risk or might be at risk for any kinds of difficulties in the further hand. That means, suppose the child doesn't talk properly or has issues with the fluent speech and all those things. So it goes on. So you understand that this actually goes on and will have an effect on other things, other learning and other communication effects. So proper stimulation has to be given at a proper time, because that means a diagnosis is not actually required. So diagnosis is will be only useful for the purpose of certification, or on a certain basis. That means if the child has a specific learning disorder or just has learning difficulties, rather than other behavioral or emotional or psychological issues. So that has to be understood, that these areas doesn't actually need to be diagnosed or labeled. So if you find out that there is a red flag, go for an informal assessment, find out the areas that has to be taken care of, and then start with the interventions. Don't delay it.
Right. Consult maybe a professional to start with the interventions. Don't
Yeah.
delay, and the earlier you started, the better it would be. Okay, the next question is from Janet. Janet is asking us, what are some of the evident criteria that can be seen in early childhood to identify specific learning disorders? So
Okay.
you have covered this in your slides, but yeah, if you could throw
Yes.
light on
Yeah.
this once again.
Okay. Early childhood actually doesn't. It can also. I mean, you have to go through the criteria. DSM 5 criteria always. So make sure that the child has issues in so and so areas, means reading, writing, or even fine motor skills and all those things. And you will have to look into that. Means there are certain markers. That means rather than the preschool markers, there are certain um, risk factors that comes up, such as prematurity, low birth weight, then what do you call, any kinds of neonatal infections, or at the time of birth, if any kinds of childhood diseases or disorders have popped up, this might have a spilling over effect onto the other language learning and arithmetic learning. So we will have to keep a track of it. It means all the development that has to be acquired at the time should be acquired within that time. That means plus or minus 2 months is okay, but still you will have to check with that, and if not, you will have to provide the child with the necessary early interventions or the support that has to be given as early as possible. Otherwise it will have a spilling over effect onto the other ones. It is like just pouring water over a piece of paper. It means if you don't wipe it at a correct time, the whole paper will be wet. Likewise it goes on.
What a beautiful example you've used there. So, doing it early and doing it on time is really important. Otherwise, the whole paper uh, would be affected. Okay, moving on to the next question.
Mhm.
This is from Ronald. Ronald is asking us how to make accommodations or modifications for students who have specific learning disorders. If you could suggest some strategies or
Hmm.
methodology.
Hmm. Okay, strategies or methodologies for modification and accommodations are, there are higher level things that can be done, such as curriculum modification, teaching strategy modifications, and you can come to lower levels such as technological in as one, putting technology into means assistive technologies. I means if a child cannot write properly, why not make the child type? So these are the examples that can be told, or even providing the child with more what do you call, multi-sensory intelligence actually brings up a faster and more efficient learning. So that actually gives us the child, makes the child, what do you call, free from all the further or the future issues that the child might be facing. And we will be handling it in the coming set of webinars in this series itself. So it would be better if they come for that also.
Sure, sure, sure. So, dear attendees, if any of your questions is not getting answered in much greater detail here, that's definitely because a lot of these topics would be covered in the upcoming webinars. So, do attend the webinars, and I hope all of your questions would be answered through the series that we have planned. Moving on, the next question is from Akansha. Akansha is saying, if a child is facing retention and memory issues while learning. Is it a symptom of learning disorder? She wants to understand that.
Okay, it may be, it might not be. Because at what age is the memory or retention is taken into account always? Means if it is during a small age, like first standard or second standard, it means the child might have a effect on his learning as one might have learning difficulties. That means you can actually tell that the child might be at risk for learning difficulties. But if it is on a 8th standard or 9th standard, because what usually happens is that there is a lot of students who actually by heart the information, means mug up information, take in information, and just produce it onto the answer papers. So when it comes to a higher level, that means like 10th standard, 11th standard, or even 12th standard, or furthermore, they actually cannot, what you call, implement what they have learned. That means 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. That means, but 1 apple plus 1 apple, how much apples would I get? That means there is no concept that the apple was there. It is just numbers that was there. So that is the kind of situations that happens. That means when it goes up like that, it is not a memory or retention issues. I mean, it's not a learning issues. It is a learning strategy issues or a study skill issues. So we will have to make sure that the incorrect strategies has to be corrected on time, because it is the teachers and the parents that has to be taken into one, who has to take the effort to make that correct. Because marks are the ones at the end of the day that all the parents and the teachers look for. But it is not marks, it is how much content that the child understand that has to be taken into account always.
Sure. If it's not marks, it's the retention. So may or may not be. You definitely need to consult a professional or seek an expert's advice to know better. Akansha. Okay, one of the person who's watching us live, that is Jamie on Zoom, is asking us, can interventions for kids who have specific learning disorders be affected by culture? And this becomes an important question, Toby, because we have people from so many different countries watching us live today. So if these interventions do get affected by culture, and if you could elaborate on that.
Yes, okay. Cultural intervention. So culture is always there, because in an African country, okay, people spit at each other to welcome them. But in an Indian context, if you spit at another person, it is actually a rude behavior. So culture is always there in it. But you will have to understand that it is not just the culture that is, it is the thinking of the person. That means we have changed over a lot of time, because cultural aspect has to be taken into account. Everything has to be maintained, but the child's or the person who has difficulties in learning or has to be taken into account first. Humans or man should be taken into account first, rather than the culture or things. So provide support, because this doesn't actually have a issue with mathematics or arithmetics. Sorry, mathematics, arithmetics, or even reading or writing English or language. This will have a further effect on the future coming life of this person. It might have a socialization issues. It might have emotional problems. It might have what do you call even behavioral issues. No, all the cultures have all these kinds of things, and it doesn't differ from culture to culture. It is all the same over there. So that is what has to be taken into account. Make sure you provide the proper support at the proper time.
Sure. So it does get influenced by culture, but not to that extent. And some strategies work across different cultures, is what I think I could interpret from your answer, Toby. Moving on
Yes.
to the next question. This is from Savita. Savita is asking, what is the importance of sensory integration in specific learning disorders, and how does it help, especially for specific learning disorders?
Yes. Sensory integration is actually because, as we all know, our brain is divided into two parts, the left and the right. Most of the motor skills are on the left side. So that's why we always write over this. So if we ask most of the participants out over here to write, so draw a 6 with their hand and turn the leg on the opposite direction, that means their foot on the opposite direction, that would be difficult, because our left and right brain coordinations are not properly maintained, because we have been writing all the time, not actually putting our thoughts into effort and speaking, or even what you call drawing things up, because drawing comes on the right hand side. So that's why we always emphasize on a graphic organizer. That means write on one part, draw on the other part. That means both the areas has to be taken into account. So bilateral integration is what is required. So the left brain and the right brain equilibrium has always needs to be maintained, for the proper functioning of it. That's why people, professionals, when they come down, tell yoga has to be done, brain gym activities has to be done. So even meditation has to be done for the child to keep him calm and all those things, because that is when you actually put in both the brains into practice. So that equilibrium or maintenance is always required.
Got it. Okay. We have almost reached to the end of the webinar, and since we are running short of time, I'll be asking you only one last question. Although there are a lot of questions received, hope we will be able to address all those questions in the upcoming webinar series that we have planned. Sorry, the ongoing webinar series that we have planned in the upcoming sessions. The last question for the day is, there are different identification techniques such as observations, screening, informal assessment, formal assessment. So how do you differentiate between all these different identification techniques, and when should you implement which technique? Our attendees wanted to understand.
Yes. Usually what we do is that screening is the first one to be done. That means screening is usually and is supposed to be done at a school level. That means the teacher should actually mark, that means this child is having an issue and should be sent in for and the teacher should make the decision, this child is having a greater issue or a smaller issue. So if it's a greater issue, send in for informal or a formal assessment. So if the child is small, we always promote and tell that go for an informal assessment, provide all the supports, that means remedial interventions, therapies if required, all that has to be given on time. And the formal assessment are for the purpose of diagnosis. That means a school might be having a special educator, but they might be requiring to keep up documents. That means the child, a report of the child, and the special educator is not equipped for that. So they send them for an external organization. We do a formal assessment and send them back to the same school, so that support would be given. So that's on when it's on a smaller class. When they come up for a higher class, a formal assessment or diagnosis is done for the purpose of certification or getting accommodations and modifications. So likewise, these actually, everything is interconnected, but it is actually the professionals and the teachers that has to come into synchrony to make them in a proper manner. Yes.
Got it. Great. That brings us to the end of the session. Thank you so much, Toby, for joining us today. I am reading a lot of questions in the chat box asking if when they have registered for the entire series, when they would receive the link. So, dear attendees, I would like to inform you that the webinars are scheduled on every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. for the next few Thursdays, and you are going to receive 2 reminders before the scheduled webinar time. That is 1 day before the webinar begins and 1 hour before the webinar begins. So don't worry, the link is on its way and it should reach your emails just before the webinar session begins. Also, if you have not yet submitted your feedback about the session, please do. The link for the feedback is being shared in the chat box. It would help us improve the experience further for us. Thank you so much, Toby, for joining us today. Your final parting words about the session today.
Yes. Okay. As I always tell, because I have been telling it from the beginning to the end, it is now that you have to provide help. That means as early as possible. That means it is not of who has to do it or how it has to be done. If it can be the parents who can take the initiative or the teachers can take the initiative. but support has to be given at the right time and at the right place. Now is the time. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much for joining us today. Also, if you're interested in the upcoming workshop series on parenting to understand how you can help your child better through by improving your parenting style, do register for the workshop. The link for that is also being shared in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This brings us to the end of the session.